Development of the TSI-T2D-A framework, a minimal mechanistic methodology for longitudinal biomedical modeling Part 1, number 1701, VPT 138, June 28, 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category: Research Methodology. Preface for readers: eat more protein and fresh vegetables. Eat less red meat and processed food. Reduce portions if overweight. Eating a little less will not hurt you. Overeating for years will. Exercise daily. Walk at least 7,000 to 8,000 steps. Drink 85 to 100 ounces to 0.5 to 3.0 liters of water daily. Sleep 6 to 7 hours each night. Manage stress. Avoid draining people and unnecessary conflicts. Put your health first. Wealth, fame, and power mean little without health and life. Introduction: This paper differs from my previous studies on type 2 diabetes, rather than introducing another disease-specific mathematical model. Its primary objective is to explain the methodology used to construct the triggering sensitivity index TSI for my stroke risk framework. The TSI-T2D-A model serves as an example illustrating how a small number of physiologically independent variables can be organized into a simple mechanistic model capable of describing the dominant interactions governing long-term disease progression throughout my engineering career and later. Biomedical research. I have consistently followed one guiding philosophy: simplicity is often more powerful than complexity. Complex mathematical models may produce better numerical fitting, but they frequently sacrifice physiological interpretability. In contrast, a model built upon a few dominant variables often provides greater insight into the underlying biological mechanisms while remaining transparent and easy to understand. This philosophy follows the well-known KISS principle: keep it simple and straightforward. Simplicity, however, does not imply oversimplification. Instead, it requires identifying the smallest set of variables that captures the dominant physiological mechanisms while avoiding unnecessary redundancy. The most famous case is Isaac Newton's second law of motion: F equals ma. Force equals to mass multiplied by acceleration. During the development of the TSI-T2D-A framework, I reconsidered which physiological variables truly represent the progression of type 2 diabetes. Initially, 5 candidate variables were considered: body weight, glucose, food quantity, carbohydrates and sugar intake grams, and walking exercise, although all 5 are associated with diabetes management. Further analysis showed that they do not contribute independent physiological information. Body weight reflects the cumulative consequence of long-term food portion or caloric balance. It already incorporates much of the physiological effect of food quantity accumulated over months and years. Likewise, blood glucose reflects the immediate metabolic response to dietary carbohydrate and sugar intake grams. Therefore, including food quantity and/or carbs sugar intake grams as two independent variables would partially duplicate information already represented by both body weight and glucose. Removing food quantity and food quality was therefore not simply a mathematical simplification. It was a physiological decision intended to preserve the independence of the variables included in the model. I call this as the mechanistic independence principle. Walking exercise represents a different physiological mechanism from body weight and glucose, and like food portion and carbs sugar intake, which directly influences body weight and blood glucose. The effects of walking are primarily indirect. Walking enhances glucose utilization, improves insulin sensitivity, increases energy expenditure, and promotes overall metabolic stability. Therefore, within the TSI-T2D-A framework, walking is treated as an independent secondary stabilizing mechanism rather than a primary metabolic driver. This distinction between dominant drivers and stabilizing mechanisms ultimately became one of the central design principles of the TSI framework. Design philosophy of the TSI-T2D framework. The objective of the TSI-T2D framework is not to maximize the number of variables, nor is it to achieve the highest statistical fitting accuracy. Instead, its purpose is to identify the smallest set of dominant, physiologically independent variables capable of describing the principal interactions governing the biomedical system. An old Chinese saying states, "It is easier to expand from simplicity into complexity than to reduce complexity back to simplicity." This design philosophy differs from many modern data-driven approaches that continually increase the number of variables in pursuit of incremental improvements in prediction, although additional variables may improve numerical fitting. They often reduce mechanistic transparency by introducing redundancy and obscuring causal relationships. The TSI methodology instead follows what may be called the mechanistic independence principle. Each variable should represent a distinct physiological mechanism rather than duplicate information already contained in another variable. Within the TSI-T2D-A framework, body weight represents the chronic metabolic burden accumulated over time. Estimated average glucose EEG represents the current metabolic state. Walking step represents an independent physiological mechanism that promotes metabolic regulation and system stability. Food quantity or portion was intentionally excluded because its long-term influence is already embodied in body weight. While its immediate metabolic effect is also largely reflected by glucose, including it as a fourth variable would therefore increase mathematical complexity without introducing an additional physiological mechanism. This approach produces a model that is simultaneously simpler, more interpretable, and more closely aligned with the underlying biology. Another important design decision concerns the mathematical architecture of the TSI family, rather than introducing division for the exercise component. The TSI-T2D-A model preserves the same multiplicative architecture used throughout the TSI framework. This consistency allows different TSI models to maintain a common mathematical structure while representing different physiological systems. The walking component is therefore incorporated through reverse normalization, instead of normalizing walking steps as actual steps. Reference steps model use reference steps. Actual steps where the reference value is 7,500 daily walking steps. This formulation preserves the multiplicative structure while correctly representing the biological role of walking when daily walking exceeds the reference level. The normalized walking term decreases, lowering the TSI-T2D-A value and indicating improved metabolic stability. Conversely, when walking decreases below the reference level, the normalized term increases, producing a higher TSI-T2D-A value and reflecting reduced physiological stability. This approach achieves two important objectives simultaneously. First, it maintains mathematical consistency across the entire TSI family. Second, it preserves the biological interpretation that increased physical activity reduces metabolic risk, without requiring a fundamentally different mathematical operation from a physics or engineering perspective. Walking behaves much like a stabilizing or damping influence within the physiological system. It does not directly generate the metabolic disturbance represented by body weight and glucose. Instead, it moderates fluctuations, promotes system stability, and improves the overall metabolic balance. It is similar to the role of pulse pressure PP equals SBP dBP in TSI stroke risk proxy. This distinction between primary drivers and secondary stabilizing mechanisms forms one of the most important methodological contributions of the TSI-T2D-A framework. Finally, the validity of this design philosophy is independently supported by the subsequent VMT energy analysis. The energy decomposition demonstrates that body weight contributes approximately 37% of the cumulative system energy, while glucose contributes another 37%. Together, these two dominant metabolic variables account for approximately 3/4 of the total physiological energy represented by the model. Walking exercise contributes the remaining 26%. Functioning primarily as an independent stabilizing mechanism. This remarkable agreement between physiological reasoning and quantitative analysis provides strong support for the methodological foundation upon which the TSI-T2D-A framework was constructed. The following sections apply this methodology through viscoplastic medicine theory VMT, viscoplastopology framework VPT, and topological data analysis TDA to demonstrate how the internal physiological mechanism and the external geometric evolution of disease progression can be understood within a unified longitudinal framework. The MT and VPT analysis, internal mechanism and external topology TSI-T2D-A framework describes the internal physiological interaction among the two dominant variables. However, understanding disease progression requires more than a mathematical equation. It also requires visualization of how the biological system evolves over time. For this purpose, I incorporated two complementary analytical approaches developed from my viscoplastic medicine theory VMT and viscoplastic topology VPT. VMT investigates the interior energy evolution of the physiological system, whereas VPT examines the exterior geometric evolution of the longitudinal trajectory, together with the TSI framework. These methods provide three complementary perspectives of the same biological process. TSI describes the internal mechanistic interaction among the dominant physiological variables. VMT quantifies the accumulation and dissipation of physiological energy associated with structural adaptation. VPT topological data analysis visualizes the geometric evolution of the biological trajectory over time, rather than competing with one another. These three methods complement each other and together provide a unified framework for longitudinal biomedical analysis. This is part 1.